So this is from a video by Mark Fio, just January 13th, 2020, about antiquated buildings and showing how these were energy centers. It's really exciting. A little bit technical, but I'm going to speak through it because he just uses text print so we can get a better understanding of how these energy centers were used all around the world by the Tartarians. And here you see the Vesica Pisces inside the Vatican Basilica and the ornate structures. So this is his talking. The dome of the basilica, like all building domes, produces a sonorous echo and behaves like a converging sound lens and focusing the sound in the center of the sphere, constituting the dome. And you can see here the reflective waves and the plane waves. It's like an echo chamber. Think about it, how it works. It thus increases the intensity of the sound, which will be maximum in the central zone, and thus plays a role of amplifier of the sound. This sound can be a song like a prayer or an organ sound. In the center of the dome, there is a canopy, which is a 4-pillar cage surmounted by a roof made of a fabric of silk and gold. The sheer opulence is amazing, folks. Everywhere around the world, elegant. The columns of the canopy of St. Peter's are in bronze. Bronze is a copper alloy and is a very good current conductor. Silk is very resistant to deformation as well as gold. So this is the power director, he's calling it. The directing of power, concentrated energy. This fabric behaves in reality like a diaphragm, receiving the sound waves coming from the dome. Frequency, energy, vibration, the secrets of the universe, Nikola Tesla. It is therefore sufficient to connect a conductive spiral of copper or bronze in the center of the fabric and to place a natural magnetic stone called a lodestone in the middle on a fixed and independent base from the fabric, which is therefore naturally magnetized. Lodestones were used by the ancient Greeks, the ancient Chinese, the ancient Egyptians, the Japanese, all used lodestones. The sound of the dome causes the silk membrane to vibrate vertically. Due to the alternation of the movement of the lodestone, the magnetic induction produces an alternating current in the copper spiral. Magnetic energy, folks. This is the description of a dynamic microphone. The sound waves go in, the magnetic coil, the diaphragm. Same thing you see at the Vatican Basilica. The current induced by the sound will be transported to the semicircles surrounding St. Peter's Square, creating 2 semicircle loops as on the diagram. This current will again induce a magnetic field that will be alternately pointing up and down. Although the place is not a perfect circle but an ellipse with a Vesica Pisces, that does not change the principles of the maximum field in the central zone, which is the Vesica Pisces. We always see this also around the Washington Monument, the Vesica Pisces. In the center of the square is an obelisk made of red granite. The granite is red due to iron oxides, so the obelisk behaves like an iron core in an electromagnetic to increase the power of the magnetic field. It's an amplifier. We thus obtain a strong alternating magnetic field extending over kilometers, sufficiently powerful so that again can be generated by induction and alternating current in closed circuits such as vehicles, tools, lamps, houses being in this field. And what do we see all around the Tartarian Empire? Those kind of like gaslight lamps they said they were. Nope. Now we know why they were there. Magnetic current. Here's the Vesica Pisces in Copenhagen. Here's the Vesica Pisces in St. Petersburg. Same as in Paris. Notice the twin towers in all these also, folks. One to each side. Part 2, the cathedrals. Water is electrically conductive, and the more salty it is, the better it will be to conduct thanks to the sodium and chlorine ions. By applying 2 electrodes, it can generate current and behave like a battery. Free energy, folks. Magnetricity. Also, a movement of charges, here ionic, always induces a magnetic field around the flow. There's paramagnetic, diamagnetic, and ferromagnetic. In the cathedrals, we have a circuit drawn on the ground called a labyrinth. This circuit is generally located under the transept crossing, the crossing of the cross that the cathedrals make, so under the arrow. See this over and over and over again, the same exact designs. Repulsion force. 2 parallel and opposite direction conductive conduits generate a magnetic field that will be of the same direction and maximum on the central line between the 2 conductors. Also note that copper is conductive as well. This is the case in our labyrinth, where the circuit makes successive reversals and thus generates a magnetic field of direction from the bottom to the top and in concentric circles. This circuit is made of salt water in a closed circuit, acting as a battery, and therefore it is sufficient to connect it in a short circuit for its discharge or on a resistor. And that's why the Earth, we have salt water. It's the conductive between the North Pole and the South Circle. The electrolysis of the water creates the alternating current that creates the ether. This is why Tesla was able to tap into it. The organs produce sounds of very specific frequencies, and in a cathedral there is air composed mainly of nitrogen at 71%. Look at those organs, folks. Those massive. They're called opus organs. These nitrogen molecules contain 2 nitrogen atoms with a triple bond that is difficult to separate. However, with a very precise frequency identical to that of bonds, it is possible to dislocate at least one of these bonds and tear off an electron to obtain a nitrogen-charged ion molecule and free electrons. We're relearning what our ancients knew. It's very exciting stuff. A molecule can be ionized without necessarily being totally dislocated, but only enough energy is needed to break one of its bonds, here by shock waves due to the sound frequencies. The result is a positively charged ions and free electrons. It's generating power, generating electricity, regenerative. Here the magnetic field created by the labyrinth takes all of its interest. These electrons will be accelerated and will rotate around the magnetic field, and this will prevent recomposition into other elements that require less molecular agitation or entropy for these processes. Why are we never taught this, all you physics teachers? So the electrons cloud will remain stable. Although this cloud will not be of uniform density, because the more electrons there are, the more traffic there will be, and as in a highway traffic jams, there will be areas of low density and areas of high density. The cloud, therefore, takes the form of a propeller. Microwave cavity cathedral. In a cathedral, the cross is composed of 4 cavities, which by rotation of this electron helix produces microwaves. Here we go, radiated energy. These waves will be concentrated and directed towards the antenna called the arrow, which will spread them into the atmosphere and thus produce free energy available to all. Now we know why these spires are in every Tartarian building. They had free energy. A cathedral can then be considered as a giant microwave. The magnet surrounding the domes. This is why they all had domes. And here you see there's no wires. Receiving antennas can transform the microwaves back into electricity with piezoelectric devices. Piezoelectric devices are energy generators. This is what they use in jet engines that produce 90% of the thrust in jet engines using piezoelectronics. Nowadays, we use the same process on telephone networks for data transmission, which is nothing more than an energy transmission of 4G and 5G. We're taking the ancient technology and turning it bad. This is what the ancients did, the Romanovs. They got a hold of this technology and turned it bad when it was being used by the Tartarians for good. It should be noted that nitrogen from air is represented by the god Amun in Egyptian mythology, who gives the word ammonia, and is for the reason that each prayer ends with Amen or Amon. How many knew that? And again, Tesla, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Why didn't he tell us he got this from the Tartarians? Why didn't he tell us about all this he had learned and knew about how they're empires? Why is it always one person instead of the many? Why were the Tartarians never mentioned before? The day will come when I will show the world that the transmission of power and speech with the aid of any wire is possible. Nikola Tesla.
Just when you think you've covered all that there is to know about Tartarian or architectural technology, something, or in this case someone, comes up with a brand new revelation, and I must admit I was very impressed. Are we looking at ancient Tartarian tech or something else in terms of architectural technology hidden in plain sight? And as usual, I will leave you to decide that for yourselves. So, hi and welcome to this edition of Static Church Cymatics and Tartarian Technology. And yes, that took me a while to get my tongue around that one. But I want to dive straight in, not waste anybody's time, and let's take a look at some of the things the churches have hidden in plain sight to start with. I tripped over this information during my research on cymatics. You know, that's the wonderful geometric shapes sound can make on different surfaces, whether it be fine powder or even a liquid surface, even magnetic liquid, which is quite fun to play with. All right, you can see these geometric shapes and patterns changes, and they are as numerous as there are shapes on snowflakes. So that led me to looking at those windows in churches, which remarkably looked like those same cymatic patterns that we saw on the frequencies on not just my episode on cymatics, but there are hundreds, probably thousands of episodes on generating patterns and geometric shapes using frequencies. That's known as cymatics. So with that being said, let me get into the details of this particular Truth File episode. It starts with a question. Can we be influenced by the shape of a frequency as much as we can be on exposure to the frequency itself? I guess what I'm saying is, can a frequency generate passively, let's put it that way, can it passively generate the frequency of the shape that it is? Because with cymatics, remember, we're assuming it's a one-way street. We create a frequency, that frequency creates a cymatic geometric shape. But what about the other way around? How can we measure? How do we assume that the shape on its own in a fixed position, such as, say, shall we say, church windows? You've seen them. They're everywhere, from cathedrals to parish churches. The circular shape of the geometry of cymatics is everywhere, but I'll get to that. But could not the shape generate on some low tone frequency out of our 2020 hearing? Because it's not just 2020 vision we have in 2020, we have 2020 hearing, which talks about the Hertzian range we can actually hear clearly. And so this infrasound out of human hearing could be generated by the cymatic shapes themselves rather than induced into being shapes by the frequencies that we are adding to it. Okay, so we're there. So can we be influenced by the shape of the fixed, creating that frequency? We may not consciously be aware of such influence, but these cymatic shapes, if frozen in 2D form, I believe can influence in ways we simply do not understand. But that's not saying that everybody doesn't understand. We know different vibrations create different shapes. This acoustic geometry in all its forms is the basis for all life, from the smallest particles to the largest carbon-based intelligent beings, which include the universal consciousness of which we are part of. For the purposes of this episode, I'm going to call these cymatics frozen frequencies, these windows. These geometric patterns created in a form that remains static, I believe, still have the capability to emit the frequencies the static representation is designed to do. Much of what we see in the world of cymatics is based on a one-directional flow, as I've said, of information. That flow is basically we start with a frequency and end up with a geometric shape. I know of no other research or computer program that allows us to determine the opposite flow of the information. That is, we start with the geometric pattern, analyze it, and output the frequency that pattern will produce. A complete reversal or back engineering of what we see towards what we feel or hear. That is, until I came across the work of a lady called Tanya Harris in my researches on previous cymatics. This led me down to this particular rabbit hole you, my friends, find yourself in now with me. And I will cover. So I've got two quick stops just to give you a little bit of background of why I've come to the conclusions I have when it comes to the major religious houses, and predominantly I'm aiming at, as far as the frozen frequencies are concerned, I'm aiming it squarely at the Christianity because of the style of the churches. That's not to say it isn't in and built into the architectural acoustics to every single religious house, irrespective of faith and following. But here is a sand mandala in Tibet and its profound philosophy. Now, I'm not going to go through everything, but with the idea of cymatics in mind, or let's, as I was saying earlier, let's call it a static frequency. You can see by these shapes that as we go down, and I'm going to cover off another tab, another site with you, but the skill in making of a sand mandala for centuries. So sand mandalas has been in Tibetan art culture for centuries. In the olden days, monks would use precious and semi-precious stones in place of coloured sand. Nowadays, using gemstones. So we're not interested in gemstones. I want to find out why they were doing this. The first monks drew on the basic design of the mandala on a flat board. They started filling the outline in coloured sand. They usually start at the centre, though that tells us how. Mandala starts with a dot in the centre. So there, if you took this whole circle, you could well be looking at a frequency, a fixed frequency of what we would call a cymatic result of a frequency that we would put in, if only we just knew what those frequencies were. Because according to these mandalas and the creator of the mandalas and Buddhists and other cultures that use mandalas and create this beautiful artwork, I believe are fully aware of the fact that they generate their own frequency by the shape that they form. It's the same with pyramid energy. People talk about pyramid energy, but the basic principles of the geometry that we're looking at here and pyramid power are really no different, because the pyramid power and the cyclonic energy rising up through the pyramid is created by the geometry of the space inside. And this, and that's three-dimensional, so the energy of that pyramid will in fact move upwards. And the cymatic is a 2D version. I mean, if you could translate that into 3D, you'd have a huge sphere pulsating energy outwards from every single angle. How mandalas heal. According to Buddhist scripture, sand mandalas transmit positive energies to the environment and to the people who view them. While constructing a mandala, Buddhist monks chant and meditate to invoke the divine energies of the deities residing within the mandala. The monks then ask for the deities' healing blessings. A mandala's healing power extends to the whole world even before it is swept up and dispersed into flowing water, a further expression of sharing the mandala's blessing with all. What is important here is that these ancient scriptures say that mandalas transmit positive energies. So in other words, a static frequency in the shape of a cymatic geometric form has, according to ancient scripture, the ability to transmit positive energies to the environment. So as you saw there, the training and understanding these monks undertake forms part of the knowledge of sacred geometry and its associated vibrations, as you saw in on those websites there. For me, this and all other ancient spiritual and religious sacred geometry encodes these frequencies into whomever looks upon them or is in the vicinity of them for any period of time, whether that be one long period or frequently. I hope this all makes sense so far, because in order for you to fully understand what we're about to cover, you had to know about the idea of these frozen frequencies and the distinct possibility, or more likely certainty, our ancient ancestors knew more about the vibrational aspects of our universe than we give them credit for, and even we know now. And if you thought for a second that I'm diving into areas that are a little bit esoterical, then you might want to Google sick building syndrome, because it's a real modern thing. You get the building wrong, you get some part of the design wrong. Human beings over a period of time will not react favorably. It is clear the architects, the ancient architects, and even our modern ones through the ages knew what was being encoded into these buildings, and the use of geometry within these structures is standard practice for Masonic constructions and apprentice masons, which is why I suspect they call it a brotherhood rather than a profession. The question then arises as to how these inbuilt frequencies influence those who enter such constructions, in our case, churches. Not so much how they feel, but how they think. The reason I differentiate the two aspects of influence is because of the work that was what many have called the Renaissance period and the construction of some of the world's greatest cathedrals and hundreds of thousands of churches across all nations. What we now know as Gothic architecture was, to all intents and purposes, the epitome of the understanding of encoding sacred geometry into these religious houses. The arches along each side, the vaulted ceilings, and in many cases a dome, all contributed to an overall frequency or harmonic that produced a specific waveform, undetectable by the human ear but fully understood by the whole body. Which brings me to another consideration. While many talk about the influence of waveforms that our ears can pick up, this may be in the form of music, which is the most obvious, but of course we are also influenced by the full spectrum, whether we can hear it or not. But what if we move away from linking these waveforms to the ability to hear and move away from the act of hearing itself for a moment? We know full well that shapes equate to sound. We also know we can be influenced by hypnotic patterns without sound. Spirals turning silently, shapes forming hypnotically, all influence our mind and body. So when frozen cymatics is encoded along with the actual structure, the architecture of the building creating frequencies into a building, when sacred geometry is built into the religious houses, the builders know what the output is. They fully comprehend the effect over time of these static representations have on the human condition. But how do we know this is actually the case and not just me being speculative and my musings or just some crazy notion? Well, for that, we move now to the work of a lady I mentioned earlier, is Tanya Harris.
예단 나조요